In this video, I'm going to describe a phenomenon known as namespace pollution, why that using namespace STD is commonly considered bad practice in industry, and how you can use C++ coding skills to be able to get around this challenge. This first piece of code will not compile, and it has this namespace pollution. So what is this? For those of you who have taken an introductory C++ programming course, you may recognize this piece of code using namespace STD. In this namespace, there are several functions and methods. The most common ones are cout and endl. And what happens is anytime the keyword cout or endl is in your code, it will replace it with standard : in front of it. I've also programmed a namespace foo, which has a method cout itself that returns an integer with the value 10. Here I have foo and standard. And so what the compiler is going to do is it's going to see cout, and it's not going to know which one to use because it might replace it with foo, or it might replace it with standard. So it might try foo : or standard : So I'm going to run this code, and we're going to see what the compiler error states. So when I run it, we see that it says reference to cout is ambiguous because it can't tell which one to replace cout with. This is namespace pollution. This is a simple example, and what I want to do next is show you how you would fix this and then describe and answer two common questions. In the second piece of code, what I have done is I have removed using namespace foo and using namespace std, and what I have done in the main function is I've replaced them with standard : cout and foo : cout. I've also done the same thing and put standard : in front of endl. This removes the namespace pollution by ensuring that it goes to the specific namespace. For this one, it will return the value 10. And for standard cout, it will use the namespace provided in IOStream and in the C++ standard. So when I run it, the code will operate correctly. And as predicted, it prints the value 10. So there are two common questions that students ask when I mention the policy that we're not going to use using namespace STD in the data structures course. The first question is something to the effect of, Dr. Morrison, I think I'm pretty smart and I think I'm pretty disciplined. And I think I'm smart enough to know not to use standard cout or create a namespace that implements simple C++ standard functions or methods. My answer to this question is that it's not you, your intelligence, or your discipline. It's the C++ standard itself. The C++ standard is constantly evolving and changing. So for example, on this online GDB, you'll see here that C++, C++ 2014, C++ 2017, and there's standards for 2020 and 2023. That standard is constantly changing. So code that you thought worked in a previous version is not backward compatible in the event that the standard has changed and creates a namespace conflict. The second question I commonly get is, well, typing out standard : and foo : standard : can be rather tedious. Is there a way that I can do this in a way that's faster and easy to implement? The answer to that question is yes, and this is what's known as a compiler directive. For those of you who've taken C, you might already be familiar with these. The idea behind a compiler directive is that it finds something that you wrote in the code and replaces it with something else. So let me show you an example. In this code, at the top, after IOStream, I have three compiler directives. #define, and I have an all uppercase cout. What this means is that anywhere in the code I have cout, it will replace it with standard cout. Likewise, it will do the same thing with endl. It will replace it with standard endl. And then I have foo_out, which will replace every instance of foo_out with foo::cout. So now the namespace remains the same. But when I go down to main, you'll see that I have these written. So instead of cout with lowercase that's susceptible to namespace pollution, I've now used a compiler directive where I can type cout in uppercase that is not susceptible to namespace pollution. So what I want to do is I'm going to run the code. And what's going on here is in this namespace, I've replaced cout with int input, and it's going to return input plus 10. The objective is to show that you can modify these and use them over and over again, and it reduces the complexity of the code. And what we expect is 20, 30, and 40. When I scroll up, we see that 20, 30, and 40 is what's output. So the lesson you should take from this is that using namespace std, while perfectly fine in an introductory course to help students learn good fundamentals, is often considered bad practice in industry due to the potential for namespace pollution in the event that the C++ standard template library evolves. The way you can work around this is to use compiler directives to simplify the code. Therefore, your code is efficient and backwards portable in the event that your program manager or your boss wants you to implement that code in a future version of the C++ standard.